Have you ever walked away from a moment and thought, almost painfully, I knew better, so why did I do that? Not because you lacked intelligence, but because your mind wasn't clean in that second. It was crowded, it was loud, it was pulled by emotion, by ego, by fear, by the need to feel safe or right or respected. And what's scary is that life doesn't punish us for not being smart. It punishes us for not being clear. Clarity isn't a personality trait. It's a discipline. It's the ability to see what is happening without immediately adding a story that inflames it. It's the ability to separate facts from interpretation and to separate a temporary feeling from a permanent decision. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around this because they lived in a world where one bad reaction could cost you your reputation, your freedom, even your life. Epictetus was born enslaved and later taught in Nicopolis that the first battlefield is always the mind. Marcus Aurelius, writing in the 2nd century as Roman emperor during war and plague, kept reminding himself that the mind can either become a fortress or a prison depending on what you allow inside. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose their life in one dramatic mistake. They lose it in small, blurry choices. A message sent too fast. A relationship tolerated too long. A yes said out of guilt. A no said out of pride. A dream postponed because the timing didn't feel perfect. Clarity is what saves you from that slow collapse. So as we start, I want to give you a simple anchor that will follow us through the whole episode. Just one idea you can keep returning to whenever your mind starts to rush. Epictetus said it plainly. It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In other words, the event is one thing, and the meaning you attach to it is another thing. The event might be neutral, small, even ordinary, but the meaning can become a storm that drags your decisions with it. Picture something simple. Someone you care about replies with one cold sentence. The fact is just a sentence, but the mind instantly adds a story. They don't respect me. They're pulling away. I'm not enough. And suddenly, you're not deciding anymore. You're reacting. You're trying to escape the feeling. You're trying to regain control. You're trying to fix an imagined disaster. That's how people destroy relationships, sabotage opportunities, and betray themselves, not because they're evil, but because they're foggy. The Stoic goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become sovereign. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Notice what he's doing. He's not denying reality. He's placing responsibility in the right place. Outside events will always move. People will always be unpredictable. The world will always be noisy. But your mind can learn to become quiet enough to see and strong enough to choose. And that's what we're really doing here. We're training a way of thinking that doesn't collapse under pressure. A way of making decisions that you can respect later. A way of seeing reality without panic, without fantasy, without the need to win every moment. Right now, as you listen, pick one decision you've been avoiding, one choice you keep pushing to later. Don't overthink it. Just let one thing rise to the surface. Now ask yourself one honest question. Am I confused or am I afraid? Because a lot of what we call confusion is actually fear wearing a smarter mask. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing comfort, fear of disappointing someone, fear of stepping into a new identity where you can't hide behind excuses anymore. In a minute, we're going to walk step by step through the traps that steal clarity, reaction, emotion, overload, environment, indecision, framing, and even inherited beliefs that you never chose. But the foundation is this. Clarity is not something you find. It's something you practice. And every time you choose to pause, to question the story, and to act with intention, you rebuild trust with yourself. So let's begin where real decision-making begins. At the exact moment something happens and your mind wants to react before you've even had time to think. Reaction versus intentional thought. Have you ever noticed how the most expensive decisions in your life are often made in seconds? Not because you chose fast on purpose, but because something inside you couldn't tolerate the feeling of waiting. That's reaction, and it's sneaky because it doesn't feel like a mistake in the moment. It feels like protection, it feels like strength, it feels like, I'm not going to let that slide. It feels like, I need to fix this right now. But most reactions are not wisdom. They're the nervous system trying to regain control as quickly as possible. The Stoics had a very specific word for what hits you first. The impression, the first mental picture, the first interpretation, the first emotional conclusion that arrives before you even get a vote. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself that he could wipe out an impression at once, which sounds extreme until you realize what he meant. You can stop the first story from becoming a command, not by suppressing it, by seeing it clearly and refusing to obey it blindly. Because reaction isn't just behavior. Reaction is a worldview. It's a habit of letting the first interpretation become reality. Someone speaks sharply and your mind says, they're disrespecting me. A plan changes and your mind says, this always happens to me. You feel tension and your mind says, I can't handle this. And if you believe that first voice, you don't respond anymore. You perform, you defend, you attack, you over-explain, you retreat, you numb out. And later, when your body is calmer, you look back and realize you weren't responding to reality. You were responding to your mind's first draft. Intentional thought is the moment you start editing. Epictetus was relentless about this. He basically said, when an impression arrives, don't accept it immediately. Test it. He taught that the mind should be trained like a gatekeeper. You are only an impression, you tell it, not the thing itself. That one line alone can save you from so much regret because it creates separation. It turns "this is true" into "this feels true." It turns "I must act" into "I want to act." And in that separation you regain something rare, choice. Here's what most people don't realize. The difference between reaction and intentional thought is not intelligence. It's time, a small amount of time, sometimes just a few breaths. And that's why clarity is so hard. The modern world is engineered to steal your pause. Notifications, social pressure, the demand to respond immediately, the fear that silence means weakness. We live in a culture that treats speed like competence, but inside your life, speed often means slavery. If reaction is speed, intentional thought is space. And the simplest practical practice the Stoics would approve of is almost embarrassingly basic. Pause before you answer. Not because you're trying to be polite, because you're trying to be free. When you pause, you're not just delaying. You're doing something deeper. You're refusing to let your emotional body make the decision alone. Because many bad decisions are really just attempts to escape discomfort. The discomfort of uncertainty. The discomfort of being misunderstood. The discomfort of not controlling how someone feels about you. The discomfort of not being sure what happens next. Reaction says, end the discomfort now. Intentional thought says, let me see what's true first. You can feel this in everyday life. Someone criticizes you, and your mouth wants to fire back with a perfect sentence that protects your pride. Someone ignores you, and your hand reaches for your phone to prove you still matter. Someone offers you an opportunity, and you say yes instantly because you're afraid it won't come again. Someone asks for a favor, and you agree even though you resent it, because you can't tolerate the tension of saying no. These are not decision problems, they are discomfort problems. Seneca warned that anger is a kind of short madness. Not because anger never makes sense, but because it narrows your world. It puts you in a tunnel where the only goal is to win the moment. And in that tunnel, you can't see consequences. You can't see tomorrow. You can't see your own values. You can only see the urge. Intentional thought widens the room again. So here's a small method you can use in real time the next time you feel yourself getting pulled. First, name what's happening without drama, like you're observing weather. I'm feeling the urge to prove myself. I'm feeling the urge to punish. I'm feeling the urge to fix this immediately. Naming turns possession into observation, and observation creates a gap. Then ask one question that cuts through the fog. If I do what I'm about to do, will I respect myself tomorrow? That question doesn't require perfect logic. It doesn't require a spreadsheet. It doesn't require certainty. It requires honesty. And honesty is the beginning of clarity. Because reaction is usually about ego, being right, being seen, being safe, being in control. Intentional thought is about alignment, being the kind of person you can live with. And here's the part that feels almost too real. Indecision is often just delayed reaction. You think you're thinking, but you're really just waiting for your feelings to calm down enough to choose. Or you're waiting for someone else to decide for you so you can avoid responsibility. Or you're waiting for perfect clarity, which never arrives because life rarely offers certainty as a gift. That's where we're heading next. Because to make better decisions, you have to understand a surprising fact about human nature. Emotion often arrives first, and reason comes second. Not as a leader, but as a lawyer, arguing for what the emotion already chose. So let's go there next. Emotion first, reason second. Have you ever made a decision that felt completely logical in the moment, and then later, when the emotion faded, you realized the logic was just a costume? This is one of the hardest truths to accept about ourselves, because we like to believe we are the kind of creatures who choose with reason and then feel whatever we feel afterward. But in real life, for most of us, it's the reverse. We feel first, then we think. And the thinking is often not pure thinking. It's justification. It's the mind trying to make the emotional choice sound respectable. The Stoics weren't naive about this. They didn't talk about the mind like it was a perfectly calm judge sitting above the body. They talked about the mind as a place that can be invaded, a place where impressions arrive like sudden visitors, sometimes carrying fear, sometimes carrying anger, sometimes carrying desire. And the question is never, will you feel? The question is, who gets to decide what you do next? Marcus Aurelius wrote these meditations to himself because even as emperor, he knew he could be manipulated by praise, by insult, by fatigue, by loneliness, by pressure, by his own pride. And one of the most powerful things he keeps doing is not positive thinking. It's naming the mechanism. He looks at what the mind is doing and he calls it out. He tells himself, in essence, this is an impression. This is not necessarily truth. Slow down. That's the beginning of emotional clarity, not denying emotion, but refusing to let it masquerade as truth. Because emotion is a signal, not a verdict. It's information, sometimes valuable information, but it's not the whole story. Fear can mean danger, or it can mean growth. Anger can mean injustice, or it can mean wounded ego. Sadness can mean loss, or it can mean exhaustion. Desire can mean alignment, or it can mean escape. The problem is not that we feel these things. The problem is that we treat them like final answers. And when we do that, we start living in a strange illusion where the intensity of a feeling becomes proof that it's correct. I feel strongly, therefore I'm right. I'm anxious, therefore something bad is coming. I'm offended, therefore I've been attacked. I'm excited, therefore this must be the path. That's how people get pulled into chaos, by confusing emotional volume with truth. Epictetus offered a simple but ruthless correction. When something happens, your job is to separate the event from the judgment. Not because judgment is always wrong, but because judgment is where distortion is born. The event is clean. The judgment is colored. The event is reality. The judgment is interpretation. Think about a real situation. You send a message. The other person doesn't reply for hours. The event is silence. That's it. But then emotion rushes in and the mind starts building a world. They don't care. I'm being disrespected. I'm always the one trying. And now your reason comes in, not to search for truth, but to build a case. You start scanning old memories. You look for evidence. You rehearse arguments. You think you're being rational, but really you're feeding a feeling. And this is why clarity is rare, because the mind is incredibly talented at defending whatever the heart is afraid to feel. Seneca warned about the mind's habit of adding suffering. He wrote about how we are more often frightened than hurt, and how we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Notice how modern that is. The body feels discomfort, and the mind tries to predict the future, and the prediction becomes torture. And then we call that thinking. But clear thinking is not endless thinking. Clear thinking is accurate thinking. So what do you do with this? How do you work with the fact that emotion arrives first? You stop treating the first feeling as a command. Here's a practical move that changes everything. When you feel something strongly, don't ask, "What should I do?" First, ask, "What am I trying to protect?" Because emotion is usually guarding something. Fear is guarding safety. Anger is guarding dignity. Jealousy is guarding self-worth. Shame is guarding belonging. If you can see what's being guarded, you can respond more wisely. Sometimes the thing being guarded is worth protecting. Sometimes it's an illusion that has been running your life. And there's another question that cuts deeper. If I act from this feeling right now, what problem am I trying to avoid feeling fully? Because many impulsive decisions are not about the situation. They're about avoiding an inner experience. You don't scroll because you love the internet. You scroll because you don't want to sit with your mind. You don't chase validation because you love attention. You chase it because you don't want to feel invisible. You don't stay busy because you love productivity. You stay busy because silence makes you face yourself. Stoicism doesn't call you weak for this. It simply asks you to stop lying to yourself about it. And this is where the real discipline begins. You practice staying present long enough for reason to arrive as a guide, not as a lawyer. You allow the emotion to exist, but you don't let it dictate. You let it speak, but you don't let it drive. Marcus Aurelius had a way of grounding himself that feels almost like mental hygiene. He would reduce things to what they are, not to be cynical, but to be free. He would strip away the emotional story and return to plain reality. The insult becomes sound waves and opinion. The temptation becomes a sensation. The setback becomes a change in external circumstances. When you do that, the emotion doesn't disappear, but it loses its hypnotic power. And that hypnotic power is what makes decisions messy. So here's a simple internal instruction you can use the next time you feel something intense. I will not decide while I am chemically altered by emotion, because that's what a strong emotion is. Your whole body shifting chemistry. And chemistry can be beautiful, but it's not always wise. Give yourself time for the wave to pass. Not days, sometimes just minutes. Sometimes just a walk, sometimes just one breath where you admit, I'm feeling this, instead of becoming it. And now, look at what this unlocks. Once you accept that emotion arrives first, you stop pretending you're purely rational, and when you stop pretending, you become more powerful, because self-awareness is power. The person who can say, my mind is trying to justify a fear, has already stepped out of the trap. Which brings us naturally to the next problem that kills clarity. We often don't act because we're waiting to feel certain. We're waiting for the emotion to be perfectly calm. We're waiting for the mind to produce a guarantee. And we call that being responsible. But many times it's just fear hiding behind a respectable word. So the next part is about that trap, the trap of waiting for certainty and how it quietly delays your life. The trap of waiting for certainty. Have you ever told yourself, "I'll decide when I'm sure," and then weeks pass, months pass, sometimes years pass, and the real decision has already been made for you, because not choosing is also a choice? This is one of the most common ways intelligent people destroy their own clarity, not with stupidity, with sophistication, with endless analysis, with cautious language, with "I just want to think it through." And sometimes, yes, thinking it through is wisdom. But there's a line, and once you cross it, thinking becomes a hiding place. The Stoics would call this a form of attachment to certainty, attachment to control, attachment to the fantasy that life will hand you a perfect moment where the path is obvious and risk-free. But life doesn't work like that. Even Marcus Aurelius, with all the power of an emperor, didn't get certainty. He got responsibility. And the reason waiting for certainty is so seductive is because it feels moral, it feels like maturity. It feels like you're being careful, but many times you're not being careful. You're being afraid of consequences, afraid of discomfort, afraid of losing options, afraid of being the one who made the call. So you delay, you research, you ask more people, you gather more information. You keep the decision open, which gives you a small temporary feeling of safety, because as long as you haven't chosen, you haven't risked being wrong. But that safety is expensive, because clarity is not just knowing what's best. Clarity is acting in alignment with what you already know. Seneca wrote about how we waste life by postponing it. He warned that people are always about to live, but never fully living. And this is exactly what waiting for certainty does. It turns your life into a waiting room. And the worst part is, you can sit in that waiting room while still being busy, still being productive, still looking successful from the outside, while your soul quietly knows you're avoiding a door you need to walk through. Certainty is not the price of entry, courage is. Now, let's make this real. Think of the big areas where people wait for certainty: leaving a toxic job, starting a business, ending a relationship, committing to a relationship, moving to a new city, changing habits, choosing a path. In all these cases, the person says, "I don't know if it's the right choice." But if you listen closely, what they often mean is, "I don't know if it will feel comfortable," or "I don't know if I'll be safe emotionally," or "I don't know if I can handle the regret if it goes wrong." And that's honest. That's human. The Stoic response isn't to shame you for that. It's to teach you how to make decisions without needing certainty, because the world rarely gives certainty, but life still asks you to choose. Epictetus would bring it back to what you control. You don't control outcomes. You don't control whether the future will reward you. You don't control whether people will approve. But you do control your intention, your effort, your character, your willingness to adapt. That's the Stoic foundation. Place your confidence in what is yours. When you do that, you stop needing guarantees. Here's a quiet principle that will change your decision-making. You don't need certainty to move. You need a direction and a willingness to correct. Most people treat decisions like irreversible verdicts, like once you choose you're trapped. But many decisions are more like steering. You turn the wheel, you adjust, you learn. You don't need perfect visibility to drive. You need enough to move forward and the humility to correct when new information arrives. Waiting for certainty often hides a deeper issue: perfectionism. Because if you believe you must choose perfectly, you will choose late. If you believe you must avoid regret, you will avoid life. And the irony is that regret is not avoided by waiting. It's often created by waiting. You regret not acting more than you regret acting imperfectly. You regret letting fear pick your timeline. You regret the years you sacrificed to maybe. Marcus Aurelius had a way of cutting through this. He would remind himself that time is always leaving, not as a dramatic statement, but as a grounding fact. Every day you delay a necessary decision, you pay with time, and time is not refundable. So how do you step out of this trap? You start treating decisions as commitments to a process, not as bets on an outcome. Instead of asking, will this work? You ask, am I willing to work? Instead of asking, will they change? You ask, am I willing to uphold my standards? Instead of asking, what if I fail? You ask, what if I keep failing the same way because I never try? Because the true cost is not the wrong choice. It's the repeated avoidance that turns you into someone who doesn't trust themselves. And here's a simple, practical thing to do with one decision you're delaying. Ask yourself, what is the smallest version of this decision I can test in the next 7 days? Not commit forever. Test. A small step that gives you information, a conversation, a trial week, a schedule change, a boundary, a single action that breaks the spell of waiting. Because clarity grows when you move. It doesn't grow when you ruminate. And this leads perfectly into the next problem, because even when we're not waiting for certainty, we often can't think clearly because our mind is drowning in inputs. Too much information, too many opinions, too many tabs open in the brain. We call it staying informed, but often it's just mental clutter. So next, let's talk about the fog of information overload and how to return to clarity by simplifying what you allow into your mind. Information overload versus clarity. Have you ever felt that strange kind of exhaustion where you're not even physically tired, you're just mentally swollen, like your mind has been fed too much and now it can't digest anything, so every decision feels heavier than it should? That's not laziness, that's overload. And overload is one of the most underestimated enemies of clear thinking because it doesn't show up as an obvious problem. It shows up as being informed. It shows up as doing research. It shows up as keeping options open. But inside your nervous system, it often feels like a low-grade panic because when you consume too much input, you start losing a simple, essential thing, your own signal. The modern world teaches you a quiet lie, that the more you know, the safer you'll be. But the Stoics would challenge that immediately. Not because knowledge is bad, but because the mind is not built to carry infinite noise and still make clean choices. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing meditations in a peaceful cabin with no distractions. He was surrounded by information, demands, letters, reports, politics, war logistics, sickness, betrayal, an entire empire pressing on his attention. And what did he keep returning to? Not more input, less, fewer judgments, fewer stories, less mental clutter, more presence with what actually matters. There's a particular kind of confusion that comes from too much information that isn't yours, opinions you didn't ask for, trends you don't need, advice from people who won't live with the consequences, endless comparisons that convince you other lives are simpler, clearer, better. And when you're soaked in that, you start making decisions not from values, but from pressure. You start trying to optimize for what sounds impressive. You start fearing you'll miss some perfect path. You start delaying because you believe one more piece of information will finally remove the risk. But risk doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. Epictetus would bring this back to discipline of attention. In his world, it wasn't social media, it was gossip, reputation games, the constant pull of other people's judgments. His answer wasn't to win the noise. His answer was to refuse it. He kept insisting that freedom begins with where you place your attention, because attention is the doorway through which everything enters your mind. If you allow chaos through the doorway all day, you can't be surprised when your decisions feel chaotic. And there's a deeper problem here. Information overload doesn't just confuse you, it weakens your confidence in your own perception. You start outsourcing your mind. You start treating your intuition like it needs permission. You start believing that if you don't know everything, you don't deserve to choose. So you keep consuming. And the more you consume, the more uncertain you feel, because every new idea adds a new branch of possibility, a new what if, a new fear that you're missing something. It's like trying to see the bottom of a lake while someone keeps throwing stones into it. Clarity, then, is not the ability to consider every angle. Clarity is the ability to decide which angles matter. Seneca warned that we are often scattered, living in fragments, and that a life spread too thin becomes a life not truly lived. That's not poetic. That's mechanical. A scattered mind cannot see deeply. A scattered mind reacts more. A scattered mind becomes suggestible, and a suggestible mind becomes a tool, easily used by appetites, by crowds, by algorithms, by fear. So the Stoic approach to overload isn't just take a break, it's something sharper. Treat your mind like a republic you are responsible for governing. Not every voice gets a vote. Not every thought gets to speak in the Senate. Not every headline gets a seat at your table. You choose what enters because you are the one who will suffer if your mind becomes overcrowded. Now, here's the practical turning point, because this can't stay abstract. If you want to think clearly, you need a simple rule for input. If it doesn't help you act wisely today, it's probably noise. That doesn't mean you live ignorant. It means you stop consuming information as a substitute for courage. So consider the decision you're holding. Ask yourself something brutally honest. Am I learning or am I avoiding? Because there's a clean kind of learning that prepares action, and there's a foggy kind of learning that delays action. The clean kind points you toward a next step. The foggy kind keeps you floating. And there's a second question that matters even more. How many opinions am I carrying that I never asked for? Because sometimes your mind is not overloaded with information. It's overloaded with other people, their expectations, their warnings, their doubts, their definitions of success, their timelines, their anxieties disguised as advice. And when you carry that, you stop hearing your own priorities. Here's a simple practice you can use, not as a cute trick, but as a form of mental sovereignty. For the next 24 hours, before you consume anything, before you scroll, before you watch, before you listen, ask one question. What am I trying to feel right now? If the answer is relief, escape, numbness, or certainty, then you're not consuming for wisdom. You're consuming for emotion management. And that doesn't make you bad. It just makes you human. But once you see it, you can choose something better. And something better doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes clarity is as simple as reducing inputs to increase honesty. Fewer voices, fewer comparisons, fewer maybe options, more quiet time with the decision itself. Because the truth is, most of the time, you already know what the right move is. You're just too mentally crowded to admit it. And that naturally brings us to the next layer. Even if you reduce the noise, you still have to deal with the place you live inside all day, your environment. Because your mind doesn't think in a vacuum. Your surroundings train your attention, your mood, your standards, your impulses, your self-respect. So if you want clarity, you have to ask a serious question about the room you keep putting your mind in. The impact of environment. Have you ever noticed how you can promise yourself a new life in the morning, and then by the afternoon you're back inside the same old patterns, not because you suddenly became weak, but because your environment quietly trained you to be the person you used to be? This is one of the most humbling truths about clarity. Your mind is not just you. Your mind is you, plus what surrounds you. The people you're around, the sounds you hear, the mess on your desk, the notifications on your phone, the habits baked into your schedule, the kind of conversations you normalize, the places you spend your time. These things shape your thinking more than your intentions do. The Stoics understood this in a way that feels almost modern. They didn't have neuroscience terms, but they had brutal honesty about what the human mind does under influence. Epictetus warned that if you spend time with people who complain, you will learn complaint. If you spend time with people who chase status, you will start chasing it too, even if you pretend you're above it. Not because you're fake, but because the human mind is porous. It absorbs. Marcus Aurelius, writing as emperor, had to deal with an environment most people would break under: politics, war, pressure, flattery, betrayal. And you can feel in his writing that he's constantly trying to create an inner environment that protects him from the outer one. He tells himself to return to simplicity, to return to nature, to return to his own principles, as if he's building a quiet room inside his head where the empire can't enter. That's the real lesson. If you don't design your environment will design you. And clarity is one of the first things it will steal, because unclear environments create unclear minds. A cluttered room doesn't just look messy, it constantly whispers unfinished business. A phone full of distractions doesn't just entertain you, it fractures your attention into tiny pieces until you can't hold a single thought long enough to feel confident. A friend group that lives for gossip doesn't just talk, it trains your mind to see life as drama, to interpret everything as hidden motives, to live in suspicion. A workplace full of urgency doesn't just make you busy. It trains your nervous system to treat everything like a fire, and when everything feels like a fire, you can't think clearly, you can only react. Environment is not just physical, it's social, it's emotional, it's digital, it's even the environment of your inner talk. What you repeatedly say to yourself becomes the air you breathe. So let's get practical. If you want to make better decisions, you need to understand something simple. Your environment either supports your higher self or it feeds your lower impulses. There is no neutral. That sounds harsh, but it's actually liberating, because it means you don't have to fight yourself as much as you think. Sometimes you're not lacking discipline, you're living inside a system designed to drain it. You're trying to think clearly inside a space that constantly pulls you into noise, comparison, and impulse. Seneca talked about the importance of guarding the mind, because the mind can be corrupted not only by big vices, but by small, daily indulgences that feel harmless. That's the environment effect. It doesn't destroy you with one punch. It erodes you with small permissions. Now, here's a question that hits hard, but it gives you immediate clarity. What does my environment reward? Because every environment rewards something. Some reward calm and depth. Some reward speed and performance. Some reward honesty. Some reward pleasing. Some reward growth. Some reward comfort. Some reward complaining. Some reward discipline. Some reward escapism. Whatever your environment rewards, you will start becoming. And if you want a sharper version of that question, in this environment, what kind of person is easiest to be? Because the easiest version of you shows you what the environment is training. If the easiest version of you is distracted, reactive, and anxious, that's not just your personality. That's conditioning. So what does Stoicism suggest? Not that you run away from the world, not that you build a perfect bubble, but that you become deliberate about your inputs and your surroundings, because clarity is fragile in a noisy place. Here's a simple practice you can do in one day. Choose one space you control: your desk, your bedroom, your phone, your calendar, your car. 1. And make it a clarity zone. Remove one thing that pulls you into distraction. Add one thing that pulls you into intention. That could be as simple as turning off one notification category, cleaning one surface, moving your charger out of reach at night, putting a book where your phone used to sit, or scheduling 1 hour where you can't be interrupted. It sounds small, but the environment works through small cues. Small cues trigger big behaviors, and then do something that feels almost too simple to be powerful. Change the first 5 minutes of your day, because the first 5 minutes is an environment. If the first thing you do is absorb other people's noise, messages, headlines, social feeds, you've already surrendered your mind before you've even met yourself. But if the first 5 minutes belongs to you, silence, water, a short walk, a short note to yourself, a single intention, then your day begins with sovereignty. And sovereignty is clarity. Now let's bring this back to decisions. A good decision is rarely made in the middle of chaos. It's made when the mind has room to see. So if you're stuck, consider this. The answer might not be think harder. The answer might be change the room. Change the environment enough that your mind stops fighting. And that leads us to the next part, because once you control environment, you face a deeper question that most people never ask. Not, what do I want? But what am I optimizing for? Because your decisions are always optimizing for something. Comfort, status, peace, growth, love, security, freedom. And if you don't choose what you optimize for consciously, your impulses will choose for you. What are you optimizing for? Have you ever looked at your own life and felt a quiet confusion? Not because you don't work hard, not because you lack ambition, but because your choices don't seem to add up to a single direction, like you're moving but you're not arriving. That usually happens when you're optimizing for the wrong thing, or more often, when you're optimizing for a dozen things at once, without admitting it. Every decision is an optimization problem, whether you say it that way or not. When you choose to answer a message immediately, you might be optimizing for approval. When you stay in a job that drains you, you might be optimizing for security. When you delay a hard conversation, you might be optimizing for comfort. When you push yourself to the edge, you might be optimizing for status. When you keep peace with people who disrespect you, you might be optimizing for belonging. When you keep chasing a goal that no longer fits you, you might be optimizing for identity, who you want to believe you are. And here's the hard part. You can get very good at optimizing and still build a life that feels wrong because you optimized for what was loud, not what was true. The Stoics were extremely clear about what they were optimizing for. Character, virtue, the kind of person you are when nobody is clapping. Epictetus didn't say, optimize for comfort. He said, in effect, optimize for freedom. And in Stoicism, freedom isn't political freedom first. It's inner freedom, the ability to choose your actions without being owned by fear, desire, and social pressure. Marcus Aurelius had everything a person could want in external terms, and yet he kept writing to himself like a man who could still be dragged around by his own mind. That's what makes him credible. He wasn't preaching from a clean life. He was fighting for clarity inside a life full of power and danger. And he kept returning to the same question in different forms. What matters? What is worthy of me? What is in my control? What is the proper aim? That's optimization language, just without modern words. So let's ask it plainly. When you make choices in your daily life, what are you optimizing for? Because you are always paying a cost. If you optimize for comfort, the cost is growth. If you optimize for growth, the cost is comfort. If you optimize for status, the cost is authenticity. If you optimize for belonging, the cost is sometimes truth. If you optimize for peace, the cost is sometimes confrontation. If you optimize for freedom, the cost is letting people misunderstand you. If you optimize for love, the cost is vulnerability. There is no cost-free life. The only question is whether you are paying consciously or paying accidentally. Most confusion comes from accidental payments. You want peace, but you optimize for winning arguments. You want closeness, but you optimize for control. You want respect, but you optimize for being liked. You want confidence, but you optimize for never failing. You want a meaningful life, but you optimize for looking successful. And your mind can't be clear when your aims are divided, because your decisions become little civil wars. One part of you wants the long-term path. Another part wants relief now. One part wants integrity. Another part wants applause. One part wants solitude and depth. Another part wants stimulation and distraction. And then you call the feeling confusion, but really it's misalignment. Seneca spoke about living according to nature, and nature here isn't just trees and rivers, it's your deeper design, the part of you that knows when you're acting out of fear, the part that knows when you're selling yourself cheaply, the part that knows when you're choosing the easy reward over the real one. To live according to nature is to stop betraying your own deeper compass. So here's a practical move. Take one decision you're struggling with. Now ask, if I choose option A, what am I optimizing for? And if I choose option B, what am I optimizing for? Don't answer with surface outcomes like money or time. Go deeper. Are you optimizing for pride, safety, freedom, comfort, respect, love, growth? Once you see that, the decision becomes less foggy because now you know what you're actually trading. And there's a second question that's even sharper. What do I want my life to reward? Because your daily system rewards something. If your life rewards distraction, you will become distracted. If it rewards discipline, you will become disciplined. If it rewards avoidance, you will become avoidant. If it rewards courage, you will become courageous. And if you say you want one thing but your system rewards another, you will feel constant confusion. Clarity is when your aims become simple, not easy, simple. Marcus Aurelius kept trying to simplify his aim to one thing, to do the work of a human being with dignity, justice, courage, and self-control. That's not poetic decoration, that's an optimization target. It means when something happens, he can ask, what would a just person do here? What would a disciplined person do here? What would courage look like here? And the decision starts to clean itself. Now let's bring this into modern life. If you don't define what you optimize for, you will default to what the environment optimizes for. Your phone optimizes for attention. Social media optimizes for outrage and comparison. Many workplaces optimize for speed and visibility. Many social circles optimize for approval. If you don't set your own target, you will be recruited into someone else's target. And that's how people live years of their life and then wake up one day feeling like they were busy but not alive. So I want you to choose one word that you want to optimize for in this season of your life. Not forever, just now. One word: freedom, peace, strength, craft, integrity, health, love, focus, courage. One word that becomes a filter. Because a filter creates clarity. Without a filter, everything feels important and nothing feels meaningful. And now you can feel the next part coming, because once you name what you're optimizing for, you start to see a painful truth. Many times, you're not indecisive because you're confused. You're indecisive because you're afraid. Afraid of losing something. Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of becoming responsible for your life. Indecision is fear. Have you ever been stuck on a decision, not for hours, not for days, but for so long that the decision started to feel like part of your personality? Like you weren't just undecided, you were an undecided person. And that's usually not confusion. That's fear that learned how to speak in a calm voice. Indecision is one of the most socially accepted forms of self-betrayal because it looks responsible, it looks thoughtful, it looks like you're weighing options, but underneath, it's often the same mechanism as panic, just slower. It's the mind trying to avoid the emotional risk of choosing, because choosing is heavy. Choosing collapses the possibilities into one path. Choosing means you can't hide behind maybe. Choosing means you might be wrong. Choosing means you might disappoint someone. Choosing means you might lose comfort. And worst of all, choosing means you might have to live with the truth of what you want. Fear doesn't want truth. Fear wants safety. The Stoics were direct about this. They didn't treat fear as an enemy to be destroyed. They treated fear as a sensation to be understood and trained. Epictetus didn't say, "Don't feel fear." He said, in essence, "Put fear in its place." Because fear often becomes large when it's allowed to talk like a king. It makes demands. It controls timelines. It vetoes your growth. It convinces you that you are being practical when you are really protecting the fragile part of your identity that can't tolerate risk. Marcus Aurelius knew this too. He wrote to himself about doing the work in front of him without delaying, without complaining, without dramatizing. And if you read that as a simple productivity line, you miss the deeper point. He was fighting the mind's habit of postponing courage. He was reminding himself that the price of clarity is action, and action always carries uncertainty. Indecision is fear's way of keeping you in a safe illusion, the illusion of control without commitment. Now, let's get more honest, because fear doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like, "I'm waiting for the right time." Sometimes it looks like, "I need more information." Sometimes it looks like, "I don't want to hurt anyone." Sometimes it looks like, "I'm just not sure what I want." And sometimes it looks like a higher version of yourself saying, "I'm being wise." So you need a test. Here's a simple one. If you had to decide today, what would you choose? That question strips away the performance. It forces your real preference to appear, and then you can ask the deeper question, so why am I not choosing that? And the answer is usually not, "Because I don't know." The answer is usually, "Because I'm afraid of what it costs." Fear of losing a relationship, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of failing publicly, fear of regret, fear of starting and discovering you're not who you thought you were, fear of walking away from something familiar, fear of stepping into a life where you can't blame anyone else. And once you see the cost, the decision becomes clearer, because now you're not choosing between options, you're choosing between values. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Indecision is exactly that, living inside imagined consequences. You replay scenarios, you run mental simulations, you anticipate humiliation, you anticipate loss, you anticipate that it will be unbearable. But most of the time, what is unbearable is not the outcome. It's the uncertainty before you act. The mind hates uncertainty. It would rather live in a known misery than face an unknown possibility. That's why indecision is sticky. But here's the Stoic reversal. You don't need to remove uncertainty to act. You need to remove the fantasy that uncertainty is a sign you shouldn't act. Because uncertainty is often a sign you're doing something real. If you were choosing between two comfortable things, you would decide quickly. It's the meaningful decisions that feel heavy. It's the decisions that change identity. It's the decisions that require courage. And the mind tries to protect you by delaying. It calls the delay caution, but the body knows the truth. The body feels the weight every day you avoid it. Now, there's a particular kind of fear that hides inside indecision that most people never name: fear of responsibility. As long as you haven't decided, you can pretend the future is not fully yours. You can pretend your current life is temporary. You can keep telling yourself a story where you are about to start. But once you decide, you become the kind of person who has chosen. You become accountable. And accountability is terrifying if you haven't built trust with yourself. This is why clarity and self-trust are linked. The person who trusts themselves doesn't need endless time. They choose, adjust, learn, and keep going. The person who doesn't trust themselves treats every decision like a trial that could prove they're not enough. So they avoid the trial by avoiding the choice. The Stoics would say, stop treating decisions as a referendum on your worth. Treat decisions as exercises in character. Your worth is not on trial. Your character is being trained. So how do you break indecision? You shrink the decision into an action you can take today. Because indecision thrives in abstraction. It loves big, vague futures. It loves forever, but it struggles against a simple next step. If you're undecided about a relationship, the next step might be one honest conversation. If you're undecided about a career, the next step might be one application, one call, one portfolio update. If you're undecided about your health, the next step might be one walk, one meal, one appointment. Small steps force the mind out of fantasy and into reality. And then you practice something the Stoics prized: voluntary discomfort, not punishment, training. You do small, uncomfortable things on purpose, saying no, delaying a reply, sitting with uncertainty, not explaining yourself, taking the first step before you feel ready. So your nervous system learns a new truth. Discomfort is not danger. It's just sensation. It rises, it falls, and you are still here. Once your body learns that, clarity increases because your mind stops treating discomfort like a red alarm. Now here's the bridge to the next part. Even when you decide, you can still decide for the wrong reasons, because you might choose based on what's available, not what's aligned. You might pick what's easy to reach, not what's truly yours, and that's how people end up with lives that look fine but feel off. Availability versus alignment. Have you ever taken something, not because you truly wanted it, not because it matched who you are, but because it was there, and later you realized you weren't building a life, you were just collecting whatever was within reach? That's the trap of availability, and it's a quiet trap because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like movement, it feels like progress, it feels like you're doing something. But sometimes the things you choose, quickly, are not the things that are right for you. They are simply the things that were easiest to say yes to. Availability is what shows up. Alignment is what fits. And if you care about clarity, you have to understand that these are not the same thing. The modern world pushes availability hard. There's always an offer, always a distraction, always a relationship possibility, always a job opening, always a new path to chase. And in a culture that fears silence, taking what is available feels like relief. It fills space. It gives you a story. It protects you from uncertainty. It makes you look busy, involved, wanted, important. But clarity asks a different question. Is this mine? Stoicism is essentially training for that question. Epictetus didn't want his students to become impressive. He wanted them to become free. And the fastest way to lose freedom is to accept things that don't align with your values, your standards, your inner direction, just because they are present and convenient. Because once you accept them, they start owning your time, your energy, your mood. They start shaping you. Marcus Aurelius talked about doing what is in front of you, yes, but doing it with the right intention, with justice, with self-control, with a mind anchored in purpose. That's alignment. It's not passive acceptance, it's deliberate participation. So let's put this into something you can feel. Imagine two different kinds of yes. The first yes is a reflex. It happens quickly. It's driven by fear of missing out, fear of disappointing, fear of losing the opportunity, fear of being alone, fear of seeming ungrateful. It feels urgent, and it often carries a subtle tension in the body, like you're already negotiating your own boundaries while you're saying yes. The second yes is quieter. It might take longer. It feels clean. It feels like your chest opens instead of tightens. It might still be scary, but it's the right kind of scary, the kind that comes from growth, not from self-betrayal. That difference is alignment. Availability tends to recruit you into other people's priorities. Alignment pulls you back into your own. And the reason this matters for decision-making is simple. When you repeatedly choose what is available, you slowly lose the ability to recognize what is aligned. Your standards blur. Your sense of self gets quieter. You become adaptable in the wrong way. You start living as a responder, not as a creator. Seneca warned about living according to other people's expectations and how easily we can lose ourselves in the crowd. He understood that the crowd always offers something available: approval, safety, belonging. But the crowd rarely offers alignment, because alignment is personal. It requires you to know yourself, and it requires you to disappoint someone sometimes. Clarity often costs approval. So how do you tell the difference between availability and alignment in real life? You listen for the aftertaste. Availability decisions often leave an aftertaste of regret, resentment, or fatigue. Even if the thing is good, you feel slightly drained because it wasn't truly yours. Alignment decisions often leave an aftertaste of peace, even if they are difficult, because you can feel your integrity intact. And if you want a more direct test, ask this: if nobody knew I chose this, would I still choose it? Because a lot of what we call ambition is actually performance. A lot of what we call love is actually fear of being alone. A lot of what we call generosity is actually guilt. Alignment doesn't need an audience. There's also a time component. Availability is impatient. It wants to close the deal. Alignment can wait. Not forever, not passively, but it can wait because it trusts itself. It trusts that the right opportunities don't require you to betray your standards to keep them. Now, I want to make this painfully practical. Think about your schedule. How much of your week is built around what is available? Requests, messages, invitations, obligations that you never truly chose. And how much is built around alignment, things that actually move your life toward who you want to become? Because your calendar is your philosophy in visible form. If your life is mostly availability, you will feel foggy, not because you're doing nothing, but because you're doing too much that isn't truly yours. And when you're living like that, decisions become harder, because your mind is always negotiating internally. You're always a little divided. The Stoic solution is not to become rigid. It's to become principled. To say, I will do fewer things, but I will do them with full intention. I will say no more often, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for my own life. I will stop treating every available thing as a test of my worth. Because here's the deeper truth: availability is endless. The world will always offer you something. Alignment is rare. It's earned. It's protected. It's built through saying no to what is merely possible so you can say yes to what is truly right. And now we arrive at a powerful pivot for clarity, because once you learn to choose alignment, you also learn how to frame situations correctly. Most people suffer and make bad decisions not because of what happened, but because of the frame they put around what happened. The frame determines what you see, what you ignore, what you fear, and what you believe is possible. The power of framing. Have you ever noticed how the same situation can feel like a disaster, or a lesson, or a challenge, depending on the sentence you attach to it in your mind? That sentence is the frame, and most people never realize they're framing. They think they're seeing reality. They think their interpretation is just the truth. But what they're really doing is placing a border around the moment, deciding what it means, and then reacting to that meaning as if it were objective. The frame is invisible while you're inside it, which is why it has so much power. Stoicism, at its core, is the art of choosing your frame. Epictetus said it with surgical precision. It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. That's framing. You're not disturbed by the event itself. You're disturbed by what the event signifies to you. The event is raw data. The judgment is the narrative. The judgment is the meaning. And once you see that, you gain something that feels like freedom. You can adjust the meaning without denying the reality. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. When he was dealing with insult, delay, betrayal, pain, sickness, he would often reframe the moment into something more accurate, more useful, and more aligned with virtue. Not in a fake optimistic way, in a precise way. He wasn't saying everything is great. He was saying, let me see this correctly so I can respond correctly. Because a bad frame makes you weak even when you are capable, and a good frame makes you strong even when you are struggling. Let's make it concrete. Imagine you fail at something important. The event is failure. Now notice the frames available. One frame says, this proves I'm not good enough. That frame leads to shame and avoidance. Another frame says, this is feedback. That frame leads to learning and adjustment. Another frame says, this is part of the cost of mastery. That frame leads to persistence. Another frame says, this is humiliation. That frame leads to defensiveness and bitterness. Same event, different life. Or think about rejection. One frame says, I'm unlovable. Another frame says, this wasn't aligned. Another frame says, this is redirection. Another frame says, I need to improve. Some frames are compassionate, some are harsh, some are accurate, some are delusional. The key is not to pick the prettiest frame. The key is to pick the most truthful frame that produces the best behavior. Stoicism cares about behavior, about action, about character. Seneca wrote often about how we add suffering by the way we interpret things, and how much of our pain is created by mental exaggeration. That's a framing problem. We take a small thing and wrap it in absolute language. Always, never, everyone, no one. We treat temporary states as permanent identities. We treat one setback as a prophecy, and then we make decisions that match the prophecy. So the first step in framing is catching the exaggeration, because exaggeration is emotional, not factual. If you want to think clearly, you have to train yourself to speak to yourself in accurate sentences, not harsh sentences, accurate ones. Here's a simple practice. When something happens and you feel the emotional spike, ask, what sentence am I attaching to this? Because that sentence is the frame. And if you can hear the sentence, you can challenge it, you can refine it, you can replace it. For example, you might catch yourself saying, this is ruining my life. Is it? Or is it just ruining your mood for an hour? You might catch yourself saying, they don't respect me. Do they not respect you, or did they act thoughtlessly in one moment? You might catch yourself saying, I'm behind. Behind whom? On what timeline? According to what standard? Clarity begins when you stop speaking in absolutes. Marcus Aurelius had a framing move that's almost like mental martial arts. He would reduce things to their simplest form, stripping away the emotional paint. He would remind himself that an insult is just a sound and an opinion, that praise is just noise and breath, that the body's pain is sensation. That much of what we fear is the imagination multiplying a small thing into a monster. This isn't about becoming numb, it's about refusing to be hypnotized, because frames hypnotize. If you frame a problem as impossible, you stop searching. If you frame it as hard but solvable, you stay engaged. If you frame a person as enemy, you become combative. If you frame them as human, confused, maybe insecure, you become more strategic, calmer. If you frame your own mistakes as proof of weakness, you hide. If you frame them as training, you improve. And here's the deeper, more stoic truth. The best frames are often the ones that bring you back to virtue. When you don't know how to frame something, ask, what frame helps me practice courage, justice, self-control, wisdom? Because virtue is the Stoic compass. It's not abstract morality. It's practical direction. If your frame leads you to become petty, reactive, dishonest, cowardly, then even if it's comforting, it's not a good frame. If your frame leads you to become steady, brave, fair, disciplined, then it's probably closer to truth. Now, there's a dangerous kind of framing too, self-serving framing, the kind that excuses, the kind that says, "This is just who I am. I can't change." That's how the world works. Those frames keep you stuck because they remove responsibility. They give you a story where you don't have to grow. Stoicism refuses that story. Epictetus would say, "You are not your impulses, you are not your past, you are not your mood, you are your choices, you are what you do with what happens." So here's a practical tool you can carry. The next time you're facing a decision and you feel foggy, do this: write, or just say in your mind, 3 different frames for the same situation. 1 negative, 1 neutral, 1 empowering. Then ask, which frame is most accurate and which frame leads to the best action? You're not trying to lie to yourself. You're trying to see the full space of interpretation and choose wisely. Because when you can reframe, you can move. And this leads into the next part, and it's a serious one, because clarity is not only about perspective, it's also about facing the future honestly. The Stoics had a practice for this called premeditatio malorum, imagining possible difficulties ahead, not to become anxious, but to become ready. And one of the most powerful uses of that practice is seeing the cost of inaction, because many people only calculate the risk of action, never the risk of staying the same. Premeditatio malorum, the cost of inaction. Have you ever been scared to make a move because you keep imagining what could go wrong, but you almost never sit down and imagine what will go wrong if you don't move at all? That's one of the most dangerous blind spots in decision-making. We calculate the risk of action with obsessive detail, and we treat inaction as neutral, as if doing nothing has no cost. But doing nothing is not free. It charges you quietly. It charges you in time, in self-respect, in missed opportunities, in the slow weakening of your courage. The Stoics had a practice for this: premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, imagining possible hardships ahead. But the point was not to torture yourself with anxiety. The point was to prepare your mind so reality doesn't surprise you. To rehearse resilience, to take the fear out of the unknown by meeting it in advance. Seneca talked about this kind of preparation often. He believed that the person who occasionally contemplates loss becomes less enslaved to fear of loss. Not because they become indifferent, but because they become ready. And readiness creates clarity. Most people avoid this practice because it sounds pessimistic, but it's actually a form of love for your future self. It's you saying, "I will not let denial steal my life." Now, there are 2 sides to this. First, you imagine what could go wrong if you act. That's standard. But then you do the second side, the side most people skip. You imagine what will go wrong if you don't act. Not in a dramatic way, in a realistic way. If you don't set the boundary, what will your relationship look like in 6 months? If you don't change your health habits, what will your body feel like in a year? If you don't develop your skill, what will your career options look like in 2 years? If you keep avoiding the hard conversation, what will your respect for yourself feel like? If you keep waiting for certainty, what will your life look like at the end of the year? Inaction has a future, you just don't like to look at it. And the reason you don't like to look at it is because it's painful in a very specific way. It forces you to admit that your problems are not just happening to you. You are also participating in them through avoidance. That's clarity. Marcus Aurelius had a way of urging himself toward action that feels almost like spiritual urgency, not frantic urgency, clean urgency. The urgency that comes from knowing time is not yours to waste. He would remind himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That line isn't meant to make you anxious. It's meant to make you awake. Because when you remember that time is finite, you stop treating your future like it's guaranteed. You stop negotiating with tomorrow. You stop delaying your own life. Premeditatio malorum is a way to wake up without panic. So let's do a simple version together. Pick the decision you've been avoiding. Now imagine two futures. In the first future, you act. Imperfectly, but you act. You have to face discomfort. You have to risk being misunderstood. You have to tolerate uncertainty, but you also gain momentum. You gain self-trust. You gain information. You gain the quiet pride of being the kind of person who doesn't run. In the second future, you don't act. You keep it open. You keep postponing. You keep consuming information. You keep telling yourself soon. And at first it feels safe, but slowly it becomes heavy. Your mind becomes noisier. Your confidence erodes. The problem doesn't stay the same. It grows. The fear doesn't fade. It deepens. And eventually, you're not avoiding the decision anymore. You're avoiding your own reflection because you can feel what the avoidance is doing to you. That's the cost of inaction. It doesn't just preserve the problem, it trains your identity to become someone who delays. And once you become that person, clarity becomes harder because clarity requires trust, and trust is built through action. Epictetus would say, it's not events that make you weak, it's your judgments and your habits. If your habit is avoidance, then even small choices will feel huge. But if your habit is facing things, then even hard choices become cleaner because your nervous system is trained to tolerate the discomfort of reality. So here's the practical use of premeditatio malorum for decision-making. You imagine the pain of action and the pain of inaction, and you choose the pain that leads to a better life. Because there is always pain. The question is, which pain is meaningful? The pain of action is often sharp and short, a hard talk, a first step, a risk, a rejection, a learning curve. But the pain of inaction is long and dull. It's the ache of regret, the ache of watching yourself become smaller, the ache of knowing you could have been braver. Seneca once wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. That's not meant to shame you. It's meant to clarify what matters. If you've been avoiding a decision, you're not doomed. You're just being invited back to your life. Now, there's a next step after seeing the cost of inaction. Once you wake up, you have to ask yourself a deeper question. What beliefs are keeping me stuck? Because sometimes the reason you can't act isn't fear alone. It's a belief you inherited about who you are, what is possible, what you deserve, what failure means, what success means. Beliefs you never chose, but they're steering you. Challenging inherited beliefs. Have you ever realized, even for a split second, that some of your truths aren't really truths? They're just old sentences you've been repeating for so long that they started to feel like reality. That's what an inherited belief is. It's a belief you didn't consciously choose, but it still runs your decisions like a quiet operating system. And if you're trying to think clearly, you eventually have to face this. You don't only make decisions based on facts. You make decisions based on beliefs about yourself, about people, about the world, about what's allowed, about what's safe, about what you deserve. And many of those beliefs were installed before you had the power to question them. The Stoics were not just teaching emotional control. They were teaching liberation from false ideas. Epictetus especially was ruthless about this. He believed most suffering comes from confusion, confusing what is yours with what isn't, confusing reputation with worth, confusing comfort with good, confusing fear with wisdom. When he said, "Some things are up to us and some things are not," he wasn't giving you a cute quote. He was giving you a knife to cut through inherited illusions. Because inherited beliefs blur clarity in a very specific way. They make certain choices feel impossible, not hard, impossible. You don't just say this will be uncomfortable. You say I can't do that. You don't just say this might fail. You say that's not for people like me. You don't just say this relationship is harming me. You say I should be grateful. You don't just say I need boundaries. You say that's selfish. You don't just say I want more. You say who do I think I am? Those are not facts. Those are inherited frames. And once you see that, you realize something both painful and freeing. Some of your indecision is not because you lack clarity. It's because the belief system you're living inside won't permit clarity. It's like trying to see the horizon while standing inside a small room with no windows. You can't see far because your beliefs don't allow far. So the work is not only to make better decisions. The work is to upgrade the belief system that defines what a better decision even means. Seneca wrote about the dangers of living by the crowd's values because the crowd rewards things that often have nothing to do with a good life: status, pleasure, approval, image. If you inherit the crowd's values without questioning them, your decisions will always feel conflicted because your deeper self wants one thing and your conditioning pushes you toward another. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the idea that we must live in accordance with reason and nature. Again, not theory, but a way of saying live according to what is true, not what is popular. Live according to what strengthens your character, not what makes you look good. Now, here's how inherited beliefs hide. They rarely show up as "I believe." They show up as emotional reactions. You feel guilt when you set a boundary. That guilt is attached to a belief. Boundaries are selfish. You feel anxiety when you rest. That anxiety is attached to a belief. Rest is laziness. You feel shame when you try something new. That shame is attached to a belief. If I'm not good immediately, I'm a fraud. You feel fear when you outgrow someone. That fear is attached to a belief. If I change, I'll be abandoned. The emotion is real, but the belief underneath might be outdated. So the practical Stoic move is to become a belief detective, not to attack yourself, to understand what's actually steering you. Here's a simple way to do it. Take one decision you keep avoiding. Now ask, what do I believe would happen if I chose the other path? Not what would happen in reality, but what you believe would happen. You might hear answers like, people will leave. I'll fail. I'll look stupid. I'll lose respect. I'll be alone. I'll disappoint my family. I'll ruin everything. Those are beliefs, and many of them are inherited. Then ask a question that is almost Stoic in its bluntness. Is this belief true, or is it familiar? Because familiarity is not truth. Familiarity is just repetition. Some beliefs were useful when you were younger. Some were survival mechanisms. If you grew up in an environment where conflict was dangerous, you might have inherited a belief that peace equals safety, so you avoid confrontation even when confrontation is necessary for self-respect. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, you might have inherited a belief that you must earn affection, so you overperform and overgive. If you grew up being criticized, you might have inherited a belief that perfection protects you, so you delay action until you feel ready. Those beliefs kept you safe, but they might be costing you your life now. This is where Stoicism becomes sharp. It asks you to live by reason, not by old fear. It asks you to prefer truth over comfort. And the way you do that is not by arguing with yourself endlessly. It's by testing beliefs through action, because a belief is only as real as the behavior it produces. So here's a clean, practical method. Pick one inherited belief that might be steering you and run a small experiment against it. If the belief is, if I say no, people will hate me, run the experiment. Say no once, calmly, without over-explaining, and watch what happens. If the belief is, if I slow down, I'll fall behind, run the experiment. Protect 1 hour of deep work without distraction and see if your results improve. If the belief is, if I speak honestly, I'll lose everything, run the experiment. Tell one truth in one relationship in a respectful way and see what changes. This is clarity through evidence, not through rumination. Epictetus would respect this because he cared about practice. He didn't want students who could quote philosophy. He wanted students who could live it. And when you challenge inherited beliefs, something powerful happens. Your decision-making becomes simpler. Not because life is simpler, but because fewer invisible rules are running you. Now, once you start breaking inherited beliefs, you'll feel something else, momentum. Because clarity isn't only something you think, it's something you build through movement. Action doesn't just follow clarity. Action creates clarity. Clarity through action. Have you ever noticed that some problems refuse to be solved in your head? But the moment you take one real step, something inside you settles, like the fog starts to lift. Not because life became easy, but because you finally stopped living in theory. This is a truth most people learn after wasting years. Clarity is not always the prerequisite for action. Often action is the prerequisite for clarity. The mind loves to negotiate. It loves to imagine. It loves to simulate. It loves to create a sense of progress through planning and thinking. And sometimes planning is necessary. But there's a point where planning becomes a drug, because it gives you the feeling of movement without requiring the risk of movement. Stoicism doesn't fall for that. Epictetus didn't teach philosophy as a set of ideas you admire. He taught it as training. He was famous for the way he pushed students toward practice, toward what you actually do when the pressure hits. And the reason is simple. Your mind reveals itself through action. Your real beliefs show up in what you do, not what you say you believe. Marcus Aurelius, too, kept reminding himself to return to the task in front of him. Not because he worshipped productivity, but because he understood something deep. When you're stuck in your head, you're usually stuck in a story. When you act, you meet reality. And reality, even when it's hard, is often cleaner than the story. Think about the kinds of confusion people live in. I don't know if I should leave. I don't know if I should start. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know what I want. And yes, sometimes you truly don't know. But sometimes you do know and you're afraid. And fear loves a foggy mind, because fog delays responsibility. Action is what burns the fog, not reckless action, not impulsive action, deliberate action, the smallest honest step that forces contact with reality. Because clarity is not a feeling, it's a relationship with truth. And truth is not found in the mind alone. Truth is found where you test your assumptions against the world. Seneca wrote about how we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and action is a way of leaving imagination. It's you stepping out of the mental movie and into the actual scene. The mental movie is always exaggerated, worse outcomes, harsher judgments, more humiliation, more catastrophe. The actual scene is often simpler, sometimes painful, but simpler. And simplicity is clarity. So here's a powerful shift. Instead of asking, what is the perfect decision? Ask, what is the next honest action? The next honest action is rarely glamorous. It's a call, a message, a walk, a boundary, a schedule change, a page written, a meeting booked, a skill practiced, a hard conversation started, a small commitment kept. It's an action that costs you a little discomfort today, so you don't pay with regret tomorrow. And the Stoic genius here is that action can be chosen even when you don't control outcomes. You can control effort, you can control integrity, you can control whether you step forward. Epictetus would say, your job is not to guarantee success. Your job is to act according to reason. That's clarity. Reason doesn't mean cold calculation. It means acting from principles instead of impulses. It means, even if I'm afraid, I will do what is mine to do. Now, let's get extremely practical, because this is where people either change or stay the same. If you're facing a decision, don't ask your mind for an answer first. Ask your mind for an experiment, 1 week, 1 step. If you're unsure about a career path, don't wait for certainty. Test your interest through a small project, a conversation with someone in the field, a course, a portfolio piece. If you're unsure about a relationship, don't wait for the perfect emotional state. Test clarity through one honest conversation about needs and boundaries. If you're unsure about your discipline, don't wait until motivation returns. Test yourself with a small daily practice you can keep even when you don't feel like it. Action gives you data. Data gives you clarity. And here's something even more important. Action rebuilds self-trust. Many people can't think clearly because they don't trust themselves. Their mind is full of doubt because their past is full of broken promises. Small promises, but still promises. They said they would change, and they didn't. They said they would start, and they delayed. They said they would stop, and they repeated. Over time, the mind begins to treat its own intentions as unreliable. That creates fog, because you can't decide cleanly when you don't believe your decision will be honored. So the fastest way to restore clarity is to keep a small promise, not a heroic promise, a small one. Because when you keep a promise, even a small one, your mind becomes quieter. It stops arguing. It stops negotiating. It starts believing you again. And when the mind believes you, decisions become simpler. Marcus Aurelius talked about doing what is right, even when it's difficult. And you can feel that he's not trying to become admired. He's trying to become consistent. Consistency is clarity in motion. It's a mind that knows what it stands for. Now, I want to say something that might sting, but it's meant to free you. Sometimes you're not confused about what to do. You're confused about whether you can handle what happens after you do it. So you keep thinking, you keep analyzing, you keep waiting for a feeling of safety that never arrives. Action is how you prove to yourself that you can handle it. You take the step, you survive the discomfort, and your confidence grows, not as hype, but as evidence. This is why clarity through action is not just a technique. It's a way of becoming someone stronger, someone who doesn't need perfect conditions, someone who can act with imperfect information, someone who can make a call, adjust, learn, and continue. And this is exactly where we're going next, because once you start acting, you will face pain and failure, not as a possibility, but as a reality. And most people either collapse under that, or they learn to integrate it in a way that makes them sharper, calmer, wiser. Integrating pain and failure. Have you ever failed at something and felt for a moment like it wasn't just the plan that failed, it was you? That feeling is one of the most dangerous distortions of the human mind because it turns an event into an identity. It takes a single outcome and makes it a verdict. And once pain becomes a verdict, clarity disappears. Because you're no longer deciding from truth, you're deciding from shame. The Stoics did something very brave with pain and failure. They didn't romanticize them, and they didn't run from them. They treated them as part of the curriculum of life. Not because suffering is good, but because suffering is inevitable, and anything inevitable should be trained for. Marcus Aurelius lived this. He faced wars on the northern frontier, political pressure, disease, the death of children, betrayal inside the empire, and the burden of being responsible for millions. And what's striking is not that he stayed calm all the time. It's that he kept returning to the same interior posture. This is here. Now what is the proper response? He didn't let pain become a story about his worth. He treated it as material. In Stoic language, pain is not an exception. It's raw material for virtue. That's a hard sentence, but it's also a freeing one, because it means your worst days don't have to be wasted. It means even failure can be metabolized into wisdom. But first, we need honesty. Pain will try to hijack your framing. Pain will try to convince you of extremes. This will never get better. I always lose. I'm behind. I'm not built for this. And when pain speaks like that, it's not speaking truth. It's speaking survival. The nervous system is trying to make a prediction to protect you. But a protective prediction is not the same as an accurate prediction. Seneca wrote about how we often suffer twice, once from the event and again from our interpretation. That second suffering is optional, but only if you can see it happening. Pain is real, but the story you attach to pain is where your future gets decided. So the first step in integrating pain and failure is separating sensation from meaning. The sensation might be grief, disappointment, fatigue, embarrassment, loneliness. That's real, but meaning is the sentence you attach. If the sentence is, "This proves I'm weak," you will shrink. If the sentence is, "This is part of growth," you will learn. If the sentence is, "This means I should stop," you will quit. If the sentence is, "This means I need to adjust," you will evolve. The event doesn't choose the meaning, you do. Epictetus would tell you, what hurts you is not what happens, but what you tell yourself about what happens and what you believe it says about you. He wasn't denying the body's pain, he was protecting your inner dignity. Because there's a difference between being hurt and being broken. You can be hurt and still remain sovereign. Now, here's why pain often destroys clarity. Because it narrows time. When you're in pain, the present moment feels like it will last forever. You can't imagine a different emotional weather, so you make decisions as if this feeling is permanent. You cut people off in a moment of humiliation. You abandon a goal in a moment of exhaustion. You sabotage a relationship in a moment of fear. You surrender your standards because you just want relief. The Stoic move is to remember the wave. Everything passes, not as a cliché, but as a factual statement about the nervous system. Emotion is a wave. Pain is a wave. It rises, it peaks, it falls. The mistake is not feeling it. The mistake is signing contracts while the wave is at its peak. So a practical rule for clear decision-making in pain is this. Don't decide your future while you're bleeding emotionally. This is not weakness. This is strategy. Marcus Aurelius would often delay judgment. He would tell himself to wait before assigning meaning, to see the thing as it is, to resist the urge to dramatize. And this is how you integrate pain. You let it be present without letting it define reality. Now, integration is more than endurance. It's learning. Failure is feedback, but only if you can stay honest without becoming cruel to yourself. There are two common errors people make after failure. One is denial. It wasn't my fault, so nothing changes. The other is self-destruction. It was all my fault, so you collapse. Clarity sits in the middle. What part was mine? What part wasn't? What will I do differently next time? That middle is where growth happens. Seneca emphasized self-examination, not in a self-hating way, but in a disciplined way. At the end of the day, he would review his actions, what he did well, where he failed, what he would correct. That practice is a machine for clarity. Because when you can look at failure without shame, failure stops being a threat. It becomes information. And when failure stops being a threat, you become bolder. You take better risks. You stop needing certainty. You stop needing perfect conditions. You stop needing to protect an image. You start living. Now, there's another layer to pain that's even deeper. Pain often reveals what you truly value. If something hurts, it usually means something mattered. You cared, you invested, you hoped. And that's not weakness. That's the price of being alive. The danger is when pain convinces you that caring was the mistake. Then you become numb. Then you become guarded. Then you start making decisions that avoid vulnerability, and you call that being smart. But the Stoics weren't teaching numbness. They were teaching courage with feeling present. So here's how you integrate pain without becoming bitter. You let pain refine your values, not poison them. If failure exposed a weakness, you train it. If loss exposed attachment, you loosen it. If rejection exposed dependence on approval, you reclaim your standards. If embarrassment exposed pride, you humble yourself. Pain becomes a teacher, but only if you listen without letting it bully you. And there's a final piece of integration that ties directly to clear thinking. You have to stop using your past pain as a prediction machine. Many people don't decide based on reality. They decide based on old wounds. Last time I tried, I failed. Last time I trusted, I got hurt. Last time I spoke up, I was punished. So they avoid. They stay small. They choose availability over alignment. They choose comfort over growth. Integration means you learn the lesson, and then you stop repeating the fear. Because the lesson is meant to make you wiser, not smaller. And this leads us to the next part, because once you integrate pain and failure, you start seeing more clearly, not just in yourself, but in the world. You start developing layered vision, the ability to see beyond the surface of situations, beyond appearances, beyond immediate emotion, into deeper patterns. Layered vision, seeing beyond the surface. Have you ever looked back at a moment that once felt confusing, and months later it looked obvious? Not because the moment changed, but because you learned how to see deeper than the surface. That shift is what I mean by layered vision. It's the ability to see a situation in multiple layers at once. The immediate facts, the emotional reaction, the hidden incentives, the long-term consequences, the character signals, the patterns repeating beneath the words. It's not paranoia, it's clarity with depth. Most bad decisions happen because we make them in a single layer. We see only the surface, the loudest part, the most immediate feeling, the most urgent demand, and we respond to that one layer as if it's the whole truth. But life is almost never single-layered. People aren't single-layered. Your own mind isn't single-layered. And the Stoics especially trained themselves to see what others missed, not by being cynical, but by being precise. Marcus Aurelius had a habit of stripping appearances down to essence. He would remind himself that fame is a vapor, that praise is noise, that insults are opinions, that luxury is just materials shaped into status symbols. That's layered vision, seeing the surface and the substance at the same time. It's him refusing to be hypnotized by what glitters. Epictetus did something similar with social pressure. He could hear a crowd's opinion and still ask, is this within my control? Is this aligned with virtue? Is this something that should move me? That is layered vision too. It's not ignoring people. It's refusing to let the shallow layer decide your life. So let's break down the layers in a way you can actually use in your decisions. The first layer is the event. What happened in plain language without interpretation. A message was sent, a job offer was made, a person criticized you, a plan changed, you failed, you succeeded. Keep this layer clean, because clarity begins with reality. The second layer is your reaction. What are you feeling? Anger, fear, excitement, shame, relief, jealousy, desire. This layer matters, but it's not the leader. It's a signal. It tells you what part of you is being touched. The third layer is meaning. What story are you attaching? They don't respect me. This is my chance. I'm behind. This is unfair. This layer is where distortions sneak in, and it's where you have to be disciplined. The fourth layer is incentives. What does each person want here? What do you want? What are they trying to protect? What are you trying to protect? Incentives explain behavior more reliably than words. A person may say one thing and do another. Incentives will tell you why. The fifth layer is pattern. Has this happened before? Does this person consistently do this? Do you consistently react like this? Is this a recurring loop in your life? Patterns are truth with a history. The sixth layer is consequence, not just the immediate consequence, but the long-term consequence. If you respond from anger, what does it create in a week, in a year? If you avoid, what does it create? If you choose comfort, what does it cost? This layer is where mature decisions come from. The seventh layer is character. Who are you becoming through this choice? Because in the Stoic view, every decision is training you into a person, and you will either train toward strength or toward weakness, depending on what you practice. Now, you can hear how this changes everything. Instead of living in the first layer, emotion and urgency, you start seeing the whole structure. And when you see the whole structure, you stop being easily manipulated by others and by yourself. Seneca talked about the importance of wisdom as a kind of seeing what truly matters, seeing what is fleeting, seeing what is under your control. That is layered vision. Wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's perception. And once you develop perception, you start noticing the small details that reveal big truths. You notice when someone's words are warm, but their actions are cold. You notice when you're attracted to chaos because it feels familiar. You notice when a great opportunity is actually a trap disguised as praise. You notice when your mind is rushing because it wants relief, not truth. You notice when you're about to choose availability over alignment. You notice when you're asking for certainty because you're afraid of accountability. This is what clarity looks like as a lived skill. So here's a practical exercise you can do with any decision. Ask yourself, what layer am I stuck in? Most people get stuck in the reaction layer or the story layer. They keep replaying feelings or narratives. Layered vision invites you to step up a level. If you're stuck in reaction, move to consequence. If you're stuck in story, move to event. If you're stuck in event, move to values. If you're stuck in incentives, move to pattern. You shift layers and the decision becomes cleaner. And here's a powerful Stoic question to guide this. What is the larger view? Marcus Aurelius would constantly zoom out. He would look at his problems from the perspective of time, mortality, the vastness of the world, the smallness of ego. That zoom out is not escapism, it's perspective. It reduces the emotional distortion that makes small things feel like the end of the world. But there's also a zoom in. Layered vision also means seeing the small, practical truth right in front of you. Sometimes the larger view tells you to let go. Sometimes the close view tells you to act. You learn to move between scales without losing yourself. And this brings us to the final part of the episode, because all of these skills, pause, framing, reducing noise, choosing alignment, acting without certainty, integrating pain, seeing layers, point to one ultimate aim in Stoicism: mental sovereignty. The ability to own your mind, not as a slogan, but as a lived reality. Mental sovereignty, owning your mind. Have you ever had a moment where you realized quietly, almost like a confession, that the hardest part of your life isn't the world out there? It's the fact that your mind can be taken from you so easily. A comment can steal it, a memory can steal it, a craving can steal it, a fear can steal it, a person's opinion can steal it, a bad night of sleep can steal it, and suddenly you're not living from choice anymore. You're living from reaction, from impulse, from old programming. That's what it means to lose sovereignty. You're still physically free, but mentally you're being governed. Stoicism is the rebellion against that. Not rebellion in a loud, angry way. Rebellion in a quiet, disciplined way. The decision to become the kind of person whose mind is not for sale, to the crowd, to the algorithm, to mood, to ego, to fear. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around this. He wasn't interested in making you impressive. He was interested in making you unshakable. He kept returning to the most important distinction: what is up to you and what is not. Because sovereignty begins the moment you stop trying to control what you can't and stop neglecting what you can. Your attention, your judgments, your choices, your character, your response, your standards, your effort, the inner domain. Most people surrender sovereignty by accident. They don't say, "I choose to give my mind away." They just keep doing it in small moments. They scroll when they feel discomfort. They argue when they feel threatened. They chase approval when they feel insecure. They avoid when they feel fear. And over time, the mind learns a pattern. I don't have to endure reality. I can escape. That pattern becomes a lifestyle. And then clarity becomes rare, because clarity requires endurance, the endurance to stay with what is true. Marcus Aurelius knew how fragile the mind is, which is why his meditations read like a man who keeps bringing himself back again and again to what matters. He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing to hold his own mind. He was practicing sovereignty in ink. He would remind himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. That's not a motivational quote. That's a commandment of freedom. But sovereignty is not just positive thinking. It's governance, and governance requires rules. Not rigid rules, principles, filters. A way to decide what gets access to you. So here's what mental sovereignty looks like in daily life, in the real world, where you're tired, busy, tempted, triggered. It looks like the pause you practiced earlier, creating a small gap before you respond. That pause is not passive. It's you reclaiming the steering wheel. You don't need a perfect mood to do that. You just need one breath where you remember, I choose. It looks like framing, choosing accurate sentences instead of emotional exaggerations. You stop letting your mind speak in absolutes. You stop calling a moment a catastrophe. You stop turning discomfort into prophecy. You become someone who tells the truth to themselves without cruelty. It looks like protecting your attention, reducing information overload, refusing to consume noise that doesn't help you act wisely. Because attention is the currency of sovereignty. If you can't hold your attention, you can't hold your life. You will be moved by whatever is loudest. It looks like choosing alignment over availability, saying no to what is merely present so you can say yes to what is right. That is sovereignty. It's you refusing to live as a responder to everyone else's agenda. It looks like acting without certainty, using action as a tool for clarity. Sovereign people don't wait for perfect confidence. They move, they learn, they correct. They build trust with themselves through follow-through. And it looks like integrating pain and failure, refusing to let pain write a story about your worth. You let it teach you, but you don't let it own you. You don't decide your identity from a single bad day. Now, there's a deeper dimension to sovereignty that most people miss. Sovereignty is not only control over your reactions, it's control over your aims. Remember the question, what are you optimizing for? Because if you don't choose your aim, you will be governed by default aims. Comfort, approval, status, distraction. The sovereign mind chooses its aim deliberately. The Stoics chose virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, self-control. And you don't have to use the same words, but you do need a compass. Without a compass, you'll call it freedom, but it will actually be drift. So if you want to make this permanent, not temporary, you need one thing, a daily return. Marcus Aurelius didn't become steady because he read one book. He became steady because he returned to the same truths every day. He reminded himself daily. He renewed his mind daily. And that's how sovereignty is built. Not in a breakthrough, but in a practice. A simple daily return could be this. In the morning, decide what kind of mind you will have today, not what kind of day you will have. That's not fully yours. what kind of mind you will have. Will you be reactive or deliberate? Will you be scattered or focused? Will you be hungry for approval or grounded in standards? Will you run from discomfort or use it as training? And at night, review. Seneca recommended this. Ask, where did I lose myself today? Where did I reclaim myself? What did I do that I respect? What did I do that I want to correct? Not with shame, with clarity. Because review is how sovereignty becomes real. And here's the final quiet truth that ties the entire episode together. Clear thinking is not a talent. It's self-respect in motion. When you respect yourself, you don't let your mind be dragged around by every impulse. When you respect yourself, you don't sell your future for immediate relief. When you respect yourself, you choose the hard truth over the easy story. When you respect yourself, you become a person who can be trusted by others, but more importantly, by you. So, as you sit with all of this, I want to leave you with an open invitation that doesn't require a dramatic life change tonight. Just one small reclaiming. The next time you feel the rush to react, the next time you feel the urge to escape discomfort, the next time you feel the fog of too many opinions, pause and ask yourself one simple question. Who is holding my mind right now? And if the answer is anything other than you already know what to do. You can take it back, even with one breath, even with one choice. And maybe that's what real freedom has always been.